Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Financial Services Strategic Modernization. It's time to act when it comes to modernizing financial applications. Today's event is brought to you in partnership with experts at Micro Focus, Microsoft, Intel, and Capgemini. We've got an awesome webinar lined up for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an educational event. We've got a number of resources available there for you in the handouts tab. Specifically, I want to call your attention to the trail map, key waypoints to financial services application modernization. It's a PDF download that you can access right there in the handouts tab. I encourage you to check out that resource for more information on today's topic. You'll also find the full slide deck of today's presentation in the handouts tab. We want this to be educational and we encourage your questions as well. So use that questions box there in your audience console, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation today. So keep those questions coming in throughout the webinar. And then we also have an Amazon $300 gift card that we'll be announcing at the very end of today's presentation. To be eligible for the prize drawing, you must be present on the live event, and you can find the full prize terms and conditions there in the handouts tab. Also for this year, starting this year in 2021, we've been doing our new Best Question prize. We at Actual Tech Media, we're all former IT professionals ourselves, and we know how tough it can be to get your technical challenges solved, especially around today's topic of application modernization. So we encourage your questions, and we'll be announcing the winner of our Best Question prize after the event. We'll be contacting them via email. And with that, I'm now excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. Welcome, Mr. Stuart McGill, Chief Technology Officer at Micro Focus, Mr. Bob Ellsworth, Director of Business Development at Microsoft, Mr. David Rhodes, IT Modernization Cloud Architect at Intel, and Mr. Vineet Jha, IT Modernization and Transformation Lead at Capgemini. What an awesome lineup of experts across these multiple leading companies. I'm excited first to hand it off to Mr. Bob Ellsworth at Microsoft. Bob?
Well, thank you, David, and thanks everyone for joining in today's webinar. As was mentioned, we're going to focus on strategic modernization and why now is the time to act. And we think of application modernization, strategic modernization, as really a journey. In 2004, Microsoft created the Microsoft Mainframe Transformation Alliance. And with that, we brought together a set of partners with the tools and services to help our customers transform workloads off the mainframe. And it's a real pleasure over those last 16 years that we found that the key success to a successful migration is ensuring that you have the right trusted partners. Micro Focus brings forward a great set of tools, Capgemini with their services and capabilities for doing transformation, Intel with the core technologies to run our workloads, and here at Microsoft with the Azure platform, and the fact that we act as trusted advisors to ensure our customers have the right partners to be successful on those migrations. And so with that, let me pass it over to Vineet and from Capgemini.
Thanks, Bob. Glad to be here. Vineet Jha, I'm from Capgemini. I'm responsible for legacy modernization practice for North America. Very interesting topic. Just to give you context, what I will be covering around this topic is market trends, what we see in financial services, and our thinking around application modernization. In today's session, the way I have constructed here to answer some of the question around why legacy modernization, especially in financial service industry, what is the current need and why it's more critical? What are the approaches we see our customers in financial services taking, and how as a partner, like from Capgemini or with our partners from Microsoft, Micro Focus, and Intel, how we are helping our customer in this journey. So to give you some context around why part of it, it's very critical looking at where we are. As we know, the COVID-19 has induced new challenges. There's a need to accelerate the digital transformation journey, right? To make that successful, it's extremely important to look from the modernization, from the application modernization perspective. In financial services, the customers are looking for product innovation. They are looking for business agility. For this to work, there's important to look at where the core business logic reside. If you look at the slide where I have projected some of the data from different leading research, including Capgemini reports, we see that 1/3 of business critical core applications that's still on legacy platform. For digital transformation to accelerate our work, it's important that the modernization of the core platform needs to be looked at. So this is one of the top priority we look in most of the banking and insurance customer, followed by definitely things like cyber security. While there is a need to grow the digital business, the key ask, the top priority for the CIOs is to secure the core. The third point, if you look from the priority perspective, there is a need to accelerate the cloud journey. FS customers, they are already started this journey and they have made some good progress in cloud native applications like for point of services and customer facing application, but they have a long way to go in terms of moving their legacy workload, moving large volume of data from the backup on archival which resides on mainframe. This can result in good savings and definitely one of the top priority for the financial service customers. Last but not the least, if you look from the architecture perspective, to grow further, to accelerate the growth, the financial customer needs to break out from the siloed approach and work more closely with their partners and different new channels. This needs a open API architecture. For this, it's extremely important to look from the legacy perspective, how we can extract and create a digital wrapper which can sit on top of the legacy platform. So these are the priorities which we see and the business drivers which are extremely important and why there's a immediate need to accelerate the legacy modernization or the app modernization further. Coming back to the what part of it, what we see, what our customers are doing. I think, this is where I will be talking a little bit about the implementation approach. Primarily, if you look at the top 3 approaches which being implemented or being considered from the modernization perspective, first, the top where more than 50% of our FS customers they are taking is what we call journey-led progressive modernization. Also, we use more frequent used word like hollow the core here, where they are looking at moving the business logics from their old 30, 40 years old legacy application and creating a wrapper which can enable their interaction with other digital platforms which are getting created. Other than the hollow the core approach, replatform and rehosting is another good cost saving and the business agility driven driver. And last, on the third on the list here, if you look at it, this is around the big bang approach where customers are looking to replace their core platform with SaaS or some of the fintech or insurtech product, right, and move fast in that journey. So as we talked about the business driver, moving to the next slide, right? If we look from the other dimension, which is from the cost optimization play. So there's a need to modernize the application. There's a need to modernize the infra, but also there's a need to modernize the process and the people aspect to accelerate that journey. I have covered some of the things around rehosting and hollow the core, but one of the tactical things which we have seen many of the CIOs looking at it, how to control the MIPS uses. The current MIPS usage rate, the increase rate is faster even with respect to their business growth. And there's a need of the hour to look at ways to optimize the application, ways to optimize the infrastructure, ways to optimize the storage. So, what trend we are looking here is there is a drive to optimize the cost, take out that cost, and basically accelerate the business transformation, which can lead to business growth for FS customer. Before moving to the next slide, how part of it, right? We covered the why and what. How are we helping our customers, right, to start this journey, to plan this journey, and have a defined path. It's a long journey, and it needs to be planned properly. This is where we, along with our partners, we have solutions and tools and accelerators like App 360, which is a code analysis platform, which where we start, where we need to do a focus analysis. We need to bring concepts around domain-driven design to ensure that it's not just look from the technology perspective, but business and technology comes together and create a roadmap which can bring the predictable delivery for this large and complex program. So that's the point, last point, which we want to put it forward, and the how is extremely important, and we are there with our solutions to help our customers in this journey. Uh, with this, I think I'd like to hand it over back to Bob to cover the next section. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vineet. And as you mentioned, when we think of business drivers, we've seen some very similar drivers that you've mentioned in your section. And absolutely, TCO historically has been the biggest driver that we've experienced from our customers. Mainframes are hugely expensive compared to an x86 platform, and being able to reduce their hardware and software costs has been probably the biggest motivator we've ever seen. But in addition, more and more customers are concerned about agility and being responsive to the business. It's difficult to change the existing legacy applications on the mainframe and then roll out those changes to respond to business needs and the growing needs of transformation. Skill shortage continues to be a big challenge for our customers, as many of you may have experienced, because it's harder and harder to find the talent to maintain the applications and the operating systems and the infrastructure. And so, finding the skills to support these legacy systems can be a challenge. And then more recently, over the last 2 years, we've seen a huge increase in customers where you want to get out of the data center business and you look to, in the future, perhaps not having x86 servers in your data center or mainframes or mid-range. And it's pretty easy to move x86, moving those virtual machines, pretty transparent to the cloud. But it's a bigger challenge to move the legacy systems, the mainframe and the mid-range. But the desires there and the tools, technologies, and services are there to support you on that journey. So those are the key drivers. Most customers like yourselves may have one that's more important than others, but almost everyone thinks about each one of those 4 areas as reasons to consider moving workloads off the mainframe. When we think of how Azure addresses your transformation challenges and how Azure can play a key part in addressing those transformation drivers. Yeah, the first piece is on mainframes, again, a hugely reliable, available, serviceable platform. Over the years, working with Intel, we've invested in technologies to deliver mainframe class capabilities on x86 and in Azure, so that properly configured, you can achieve the same level of reliability, availability, serviceability as you do on the mainframe. In addition, you're able to set up for business continuity or disaster recovery, failover to a backup system at a very low cost, because you're only paying for consumption. You don't have to pre-purchase the technologies or pre-purchase the hardware. You also have the ability to grow and shrink the workload for month-end processing, year-end processing. So having capacity elasticity is part of the capabilities of the platform. We also think about the development environment and moving to a more agile and modern development environment. With Azure DevOps, you're able to use technologies from Micro Focus to be able to do Azure development instead of waterfall processes, move into a DevOps process. You're also able to deploy using new technologies like containers, whether it be Kubernetes or Docker or OpenShift, fully supported from the Micro Focus technologies. Also, for most customers, you're not able to move everything at once off the mainframe, but instead would like to move a portion of the workload one at a time. And the beauty is, because of investments that Microsoft has made in interoperability between the data center and the cloud, you're able to implement a hybrid solution where you can move a portion of the workload one at a time, along with those databases, and interoperate between the mainframe workload in the data center and the replatformed workload, rehosted workload that runs up in the cloud. And lastly, moving these workloads to the cloud is not the end of the journey. It's really the beginning. Because once you're in Azure, you're able to take advantage of data analytics and machine learning, even cognitive recognition and recognition services. So don't throw away what you've got, the investment you've made in your legacy applications and systems, but instead continue evolving those systems, taking advantage of Azure services. And with that, let me pass it over to David from Intel.
Great, thank you, Bob. As Bob said, with Intel, and I work with the legacy migration opportunities that we have across the data centers globally. And one of the things I want to talk about is a lot of people are probably thinking they've got a mainframe, they've had mainframe for years, we're Intel, what have we got to do with that story? And as Bob's kind of pointed out, we've been in the business of cloud innovation for 22 years and working with Microsoft and others. The key dates that I want to bring up are in 2005 and 6 when we launched our virtualization technology, which really was the jumpstart to the cloud revolution that has been occurring since then. And if you look at 2012, that's when we first started building our first custom silicon Xeon processor specifically for the cloud service companies because of their needs being unique. And going forward here in 2021, we continue that innovation and we focus right now in areas such as encryption and security, which are really going to be important as people move more and more workloads into a cloud-enabled infrastructure. Now, again, most people are going to think of Intel as being a CPU company. But if you look at what Intel does with Microsoft, we work across the board with workloads and their infrastructure in Azure. We have our Xeon processor family, which is the CPU that powers majority of the instances within Azure. But along with that, we have things like field programmable ASICs, which are used in their network filtering in Bing search and such to actually accelerate the way the data packets flow within the network. We have the ability to do the software guard extensions, which is what Azure uses to create their confidential compute environments. And then with Optane persistent memory, that's our memory that's used in some of the large instances, especially around things like SAP for in-memory databases, which allow a very, very large footprint of memory in a machine which typically isn't able to accommodate that much in a DIMM capacity. And then around the networking, again, we have the silicon photonics, which is a physical layer that's used with a lot of the interconnects within the networks within Azure. And then, of course, our Intel software enablement with our open source frameworks that accelerate everything from machine learning to AI and other libraries across the board. And with this overall design, we're bringing the capability to handle this future growth of data, the explosion of data that's going to be happening, that is happening across the industry, and really, thinking forward to as you do move your workloads to Azure, that data now can be looked at in a different way than what has typically been looked at before with a legacy platform. Again, collectively, when you look at these core technologies that Intel offers, we optimize the performance across them. If you look at the aggregated sum, when you use multiple levels of Intel technology, we get a magnification factor that allows better performance. And again, this allows for not just performant workloads to work really, really well in the Azure environment, but also if you think about it, because it's performant, you actually are driving costs down because the cost per VM density per core is reduced. You can put more work on fewer machines, fewer instances. So that's actually a cost enabling function that will let you drive down costs by having that capability. It's not just about performance, but that performance allows you to put more work on fewer systems and lower your costs, which is another motivating factor of why you want to go to a cloud-enabled infrastructure and get off the legacy platforms. We've created with Microsoft unique instances to handle general purpose workloads, which would be relational databases, any web apps, enterprise-grade applications, all the way up to the compute optimized, which for the financial industry would be things like Monte Carlo farms, actuarials for insurance companies, and of course, machine learning, AI inferencing, and all your data science and functions such as that. All the way up to, as I mentioned before, with the persistent memory optimized large footprint models, the M series of Azure instances for example, has those functions in it. And really, when you look at it, this allows us to create fit-for-purpose configurations for the type of workload you're running. Again, driving the functionality you need and optimizing the cost in doing so. So here's an example of when we do the connection between the Azure VMs and the latest technology, the amount of increase in performance that you're actually seeing by using the latest technology. And not only is it providing the exceptional performance, but if you look at this quote from Mark Rusanovich, who's the CTO for Microsoft Azure, the new features we have with software guard extensions, with memory encryption and cryptographic acceleration, is really going to provide the performance to really provide those secure environments you're going to be demanding as you move your mission critical workloads into Azure and some stuff that's running in your legacy platforms with the mainframes. And again, as Bob hit on the point, and as you look at what Intel has done across the cloud native landscape, some of these icons up here may or may not be familiar with some mainframe folks, but basically Intel has enabled the entire ecosystem, whether it's around analytics, machine learning, Kubernetes containerization, the OpenShift for virtualization, orchestration, all these functionalities we've enabled with our software and our hardware, and actually drove up performance and throughput and improvements and savings of cost. And in doing so, the key point is that as you move these workloads up, you're probably not just going to move the workload and keep it there. As Bob said, it's a journey. This is really the start of the innovation. Get the workloads up there, then you can look at, now that they're up there, what can the line of businesses do, since this data has now had its shackles removed, to really monetize that function and actually drive up more business value to the overall company. Again, when you look at this in summary, Microsoft and Intel working together, we've created optimized platforms that are going to drive the business value along your modernization journey from these legacy platforms. So with that, I'll pass it to Stuart from Micro Focus.
Thank you very much, David. We're going to transition from really looking at the fundamentals of the platform to begin to look at how an individual journey might take place for an application or for a customer. And probably the first place to start, which is often the first question that most customers would actually ask us, is, have you done this before? And actually, one of the key values of the team that's on this call is we've probably delivered at least 1,000 different customers from mainframe into distributed and cloud architectures. And I'm happy to say that this team on the call, we've never had a failure to actually get the customer to the platform of their desired choice on time and on budget. And so that, in other words, we're talking about something that we've been doing for many years. There's a lot of experience in the room, and we can literally translate every general journey into something that's specific to a customer and specific to an application. The types, when we're talking about financial services, there's a key aspect to that particular market that's probably different from many of the others that we've just been referring to. Most financial services customers, generally speaking, have a significantly larger mainframe capacity that needs to be moved than in other particular niches. We're currently dealing with customers anything between 50 and 400,000 MIPS who are saying that they want to move to the cloud. And in fact, the largest active engagement where we aim to be coming to a conclusion in the next 18 months is actually around 330,000 MIPS. So bridging back to the conversation we just had from Intel, you can see that the performance characteristics of the platform have evolved to a point where we can literally deal with the biggest mainframe loads, either from a specific application or a group of applications that represents a business function. The benefits, which we're going to touch on in a minute, relate really to the mainframe budget in itself. It's become the largest, quite often the largest component of the financial services industry's IT budget. And largely speaking, it's been standalone for some time, and it's become obvious that it's difficult to manage it down significantly or fast enough whilst investments grow in other parts of the business. But there, of course, there's specific reasons to that. The applications risk is perceived to be quite considerable. Typically, this platform has been running the business for 40 years. We're talking about moving it to a different platform. But believe me, we understand that we're talking about moving it to a different platform, that the business will be operating in a slightly different way and being able to take advantage of the future. We understand the transactional data volumes that are going to be moved, and we also understand the level of proprietariness and the complexity of the components built into the platform. So we're dealing with a known quantity. Why do customers actually look at this? Well, specifically, and one has to be very careful, because every customer would say, we hear the marketing statements, but what does this really mean to me? Well, again, we've built up enough business cases that we truly understand what we can deliver and what the likely benefits are to a customer embarking on this journey. Bob was touching on agility. Quite often for customers who even perhaps haven't even made the decision to move production off the mainframe, moving the DevOps process and the full tool chain to support all the ongoing modernization options is an immediate and fundamental benefit. We have customers, for example, insurance, who've literally quadrupled their ability, their throughput of new business functionality by leveraging the Azure as a platform for DevOps that's scalable at a moment's notice to drive increased productivity, increased capacity, and new benefit. And of course, it then becomes a bridge from moving DevOps, given that you're already running applications in almost a test or pre-production mode, to actually begin to move applications into production to the cloud architectures, whether it's private, public, or hybrid. And we've delivered this in all sorts of different iterations, whether we're rehosting an application, which broadly speaking means moving an application, keeping its existing interfaces and largely as is, to beginning to improve and accelerate the modernization process when it lands on Azure. Hence, we're beginning to rehost and refactor, rehost to refactor, which means it's a two-step process, if not refactor in itself. And why would you do that? Well, first of all, it maps onto that agility message, but similarly, you achieve a very significant OpEx saving as a result. And we're going to touch less in general and more in a specific. But this team that's on the call has the ability to build the project to deliver these types of savings, potentially with it being self-funding all the way through. In other words, you take the savings that you've delivered from the DevOps process and you reinvest those in terms of moving production workloads. How does that look specifically? Well, it's a bit of a complicated slide, but this is a real customer who's currently in flight. This is a customer that did actually require it to be self-funding. Hence, they took their mainframe programs that they're currently running, and you can see basically in the top line that they're already reducing their mainframe MIPS capacity that they're utilizing over a period of years through several different actions. They then did the second line, which is delivering the DevOps process off the mainframe in Azure but not just increase agility, but you can already see generate cost savings as a direct result, which were then invested in a rehosting project and subsequent modernization project that began to deliver significant OpEx savings just comparing platform to platform. Now, in this particular context, this customer has planned to save on exit 34–40% of their operating costs, and that includes all of their people, all of the software infrastructure, all of the hardware infrastructure. And this is a real project that we're talking about. And we have numerous examples of this, but it kind of crystallizes the fact that benefits can be delivered to customers that relate directly to their own budgets and to their own instances. How do we go about doing this? Well, we've described it in a modernization maturity model that looks at the aspects of the journey. All of the presenters on this call have described this as a journey, and it's correct. This isn't a single step. This is a kind of multiple step journey that takes the business into the future, ensures that the applications that are supporting the business are suitable for purpose, are fit for purpose, and indeed continues the ability to manage the iterative improvement and productivity of the system itself, and indeed all the people who are working on it, all the way through this journey and into a future that we can't necessarily predict today. The way this maturity model works is essentially we're starting at level 1, which typically is on the mainframe, of course, where we understand the applications are likely to be fairly monolithic, they're going to be very proprietary, and of course, the transaction model is designed as ACID. IT processes are likely to be waterfall. Actually, in many cases now, they're more like a water scrumfall process, but they still have restrictions, particularly on the mainframe platform when we go into production. The management processes and cultural processes are just as important here, and it's often something that customers forget, that it's not just applications, it's not just systems that are taking the journey, it's the people that work on them. And for those people, they contain all of the intellectual property that underpins these applications, and therefore they're just as important to kind of articulate how fast the journey can go and how far the journey can go at any one point. Typically, our customers will essentially make a decision that they're moving off the mainframe, potentially into distributed, but more often than not today, into some sort of cloud architected state. The simplest way of looking at that is a cloud-ready state, where you're trying to move basically monolithic applications into being a loosely coupled architecture. You're typically transitioning to a relational data model, and you've got some sort of physical element of leveraging containers. We call them like a macro container, because quite often we're nowhere close to microservices, but you're starting to enable a service-driven model, which you can refine going forward. The IT processes, the DevOps processes are definitely going to be agile, moving into DevOps. And indeed, again, management and people from the broader context of IT are being leveraged to begin to drive the overall performance of the organization. And from cloud ready, it's possible then to either target cloud optimized, where you're beginning to look at finer granular components. You're definitely looking at API services and leveraging containers in themselves. And gradually you're improving the rest of the infrastructure that supports these applications, until at some point you may make a decision to move to a full cloud native state, where we're talking about microservices, they're potentially be using NoSQL, and indeed you've transitioned to a base transaction model. And a key element to point out here is when we talk about cloud native, that is a fundamental re-architecting of applications. And the benefit of the maturity model in its whole is that you can take a decision as to how far you want to move down this journey on an application by application basis, and never be limited to how far you can go, but can also always take a step back if the business case that relates to a specific application doesn't actually require some of the fundamental capabilities we're talking about. How do we deliver this? Well, we work as a team. So it's Micro Focus, Microsoft, indeed Capgemini, and of course Intel. And each of us have different aspects of a project, and we're all used to interacting with ourselves as we go through a project, each leveraging the unique skills that we bring to bear, and each leveraging the experience that's necessary to ensure that an application, or indeed an entire division of applications, is fundamentally moved and is delivered as a successful project. The key starting point, as we were describing earlier, is essentially around assessment and planning. An initial assessment may take 1 or 2 weeks, but it will give a very good thumbnail as to the complexity of the application portfolio and the cost model that surrounds that application portfolio in terms of the type of modernization journey that's being considered. So that's really a very good test of the scope of a project. It's a very good test to be able to start the engagement with senior levels of management inside a customer's IT group, both for us as vendors, but also for our customers to begin to explore the likely benefits, the business case, and indeed the prepare the company for the journey that's going to be involved. In Micro Focus, we obviously bring tooling to the table. Hence, underneath our assessment phases, we're using a product called Enterprise Analyzer, which supports both rapid assessment in terms of flexible application delivery, but it gets to a very fine level of detail very, very quickly to be able to identify work groups, some of the services that are already intrinsic to the applications. It clearly identifies programs and data dependencies within business domains. It does help us restore lost knowledge and indeed make the informed planning decisions. Now, all that sounds obvious, but actually one of the most routine parts of a project when we all get started on this is we actually have to find all of the source code that we're really talking about. And it typically is a fairly iterative process in order to do that within our customer base. Similarly, actually identifying some of the problem areas and potentially even lost code, meaning core components can be delivered by software vendors themselves or third-party vendors, and therefore that might not necessarily be easily accessible. Hence, identifying that very, very early on, or indeed proprietary mainframe components that are very difficult to move, is fundamental to really beginning to build a project plan that is deliverable. The core platform that we're really going to be operating on, particularly when we obviously rehost IBM mainframe applications, is actually Enterprise Server sitting on Azure, sitting on the Intel platform. These are the types of capability that we're bringing to the table. If it's an IBM application written in COBOL or PO1, JCL, and indeed Rex, whether it's using CICS or IMS, whether it's a batch application or it's online, and using a whole variety of databases that come from the mainframe, we support these natively. And what that means is that these applications, hence when recompiled on the Micro Focus platform, can normally run in the platform, at least in a single user development mode, literally within days. So we have a lot of core competence that's already built in. And once the application portfolio actually goes live, of course, this exists as an Azure instance that can leverage everything else that the Azure platform can bring to the table, and indeed all the other fundamental benefits that all the other applications are beginning to use. In terms of, for example, accessing data in SQL Server or Azure, using Cosmos potentially going forward, looking at various storage aspects, security, monitoring, etc. So in other words, the whole platform is operationalized to be able to support mainframe applications running in production with the same type of SLA that most of our financial services customers are used to today. A key element for most customers is really understanding how do we deal with scaling out. And because a core concern, particularly, for example, in banking or trading aspects, is can we support the same level of performance that the mainframe delivers today? How do we scale up? How do we scale out? And these questions are kind of answered with Enterprise Server in terms of how it essentially is architected. For mainframers, it's very simple to almost understand in that we've used mainframe concepts to be able to then deploy that into an Azure cluster. Hence, we have a performance and availability that can simply scale out and take advantage of the scalability of the Azure platform in itself, which also allows us to do things that, frankly, as further down the modernization journey, probably are not necessarily being considered. For example, today we have customers where in the past, they would be running a single batch job and considered that to be running in a single LPAR. Well, of course, once you're in Azure, you can take advantage of any number of instances that might represent such an LPAR at a moment's notice to scale up and down. Hence, we have customers who've broken down batch jobs so that they run simply in parallel to accelerate the delivery of obviously vital information to their own clients. Similarly, even on the DevOps side of the equation, we use that same scalability. So it's relatively straightforward for a developer to have the equivalent of their own mainframe LPAR accessible to them uniquely whenever they need it. It isn't an LPAR, it's just an Azure instance. And that type of capacity is just inconceivable on the mainframe today. Similarly, we leverage the full capacity of SQL Server and indeed a lot of the relational data models so that we can already load a lot of the hierarchical database information, whether it's VSAM or all of its different derivatives. We actually store that in the relational model to leverage the scalability and scale out capability that's fundamental to the platform, which once again, generally speaking, and I have to speak generally on this, for a small to medium-sized company, quite often the unexpected benefit of moving off the mainframe is actually a performance increase, which is never considered to be fundamental to the business case, but is certainly beneficial to the client going forward. We described the modernization journey as never ending, and we don't think it does. It's always an iterative process. The key element is, and the first biggest step, is moving off the mainframe into the cloud as the fundamental starting place. But once in the cloud, most of the modernization steps that are going to be taken are much smaller, they're far more iterative, and actually they form the basis of business as usual. Simply because you've got the productivity and scalability of the platform, the flexibility that's fundamental to it, it means that you can start to do the type of work that on the mainframe will be considered a big bang project, but turn it into projects that last potentially weeks or maybe even months. And again, we return back to our analysis capability to really be able to identify, for example, core code that's of value. This is the intellectual property that we were talking about earlier, to identify that value in code itself and to be able to cut the code out as a component, load it, wrap it successfully, and actually deploy it as into a new application at will. And hence this is borderline refactoring to some extent, but refactoring to deliver a component into a Java-based world. So these are all parts of a project. This is the technology that underpins these types of project. And at the core to it is less about the technology in itself, but it's the team of the people who are actually delivering the project to customers. And that's fundamental to the story that we're trying to tell today, and that we hope we've been able to describe at least reasonably well for the audience out there. So I'll turn it back to David. Thank you very much, our host.
Bob, Vineet, David, and Stuart, great to have you back. It's time to take some questions from the audience. Let's see, we've got a lot of great questions coming in. Thank you everyone out there for those. If you have a question, now is the time to get it in. The first one, and feel free to interject here at any point. I want to keep this conversational, like a discussion. The question is, regarding data architecture and financial services, what approach in financial services is best? Really, is it cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, private cloud? I guess we'll start with you, Stuart.
It's a good question. I think generally speaking, all of the above. As long as it's cloud, we can really cope with it. I think it really partly depends on the customer's starting point and the fundamental benefits that they really want to drive out of the platform itself. When you're relating to data, one of the key advantages, of course, of this modernization process is that mainframe data becomes based in a platform that's already being used typically by the rest of the business, whether it's a distributed, whether it's Windows-based applications, whether it's Linux-based applications, whether they're Java applications or written in any language. Essentially, you're moving mainframe applications so that they reside in a common platform, and indeed the data then typically obviously resides in that common platform as well, which means it's much more accessible to other business processes, other applications, other developers, other divisions. I would probably pass it back to Bob because I'm sure he's got a point to make on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is all of the above, and it really depends on the data and the level of confidential information in that data. Fortunately, Azure does have accreditations in the financial sector for allowing you to put confidential financial information in Azure. So be sure that the right accreditations are there to allow you, to do that within the industry. And also the ability to have data on premise that you can't move to the cloud for some legislative reasons, and be able to access that data in the cloud from applications that are moved to the cloud. So the fact that you can have a hybrid implementation with some data being on premise, some data being in the cloud, allows you to support whatever the limitations might be in your particular environment.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see, next question. I'll start with Vineet on this one because they're asking specifically about, they're addressing it to you actually, Vineet. When it comes to mainframe modernization, they say it touches the core systems all the way to the critical business. Do you have any recommendations to assure customers that they'll have a seamless transition? And two other follow-up questions. Do you do parallel run? And what about disaster recovery?
Great question, right? That is two parts of it, right? So recommendation perspective, definitely there's a need to do a detailed analysis and planning, right? That's where the tools which Stuart covered, I covered, right? Which provides lots of inputs and creates a roadmap. Second, extremely important is to bring business right upfront. This is not just a technology project or application owner should be there. So you need to have some sort of domain-driven design, create a logical business context, right, and then put the plan. David, I missed the second part of your question, but if you can talk about the backup and recovery, maybe Bob can help more on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did pick that up as far as backup and recovery. Oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah, the second part was about whether you should do a parallel run and disaster recovery best practices. Bob, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so there's two things. Vineet covered it well as far as ensuring that you really assess the environment and build an architecture, and that's where Capgemini, Micro Focus, and ourselves working together can help you do that. In addition, testing is so critical that once this new environment is created for the set of applications you want to move, doing extensive testing to be sure that it gives you the same results as on-premise. And then once you do migrate, you do need the ability to fail back, to go back to the data center if there's some hiccup or performance issue or other challenges that may be encountered. So it is a multi-step process, just like you do in the data center as you roll out changes to your applications, changes to your environment. So treat Azure as you would a mainframe in the systems and processes you put in place to update or implement applications.
I was going to add, as far as the testing with the cloud native tools and capabilities, you can do a lot more automation of your test runs. You can create Kubernetes containers, known data sets. So every build you make, every module that gets checked in, you can do pre-testing, which is very difficult to do with some of the legacy environments.
Absolutely.
And finally, I would call out that you have to also bear in mind that when you're comparing the hardware infrastructure from a mainframe test LPAR to, for example, an Azure equivalent LPAR, you're probably looking at a 95% cost decrease. Hence, you can actually afford to do significantly more testing than you probably ever could on the mainframe. And that's not just a value when you're trying to transition off the mainframe to cloud, it actually becomes a fundamental core benefit of cloud operations going forward.
Excellent points all around. And the cost question there kind of brings us into our next question. They're asking about a TCO comparison and calculation from moving to mainframe to the cloud. Any best practices or recommendations around that?
Let me touch on it first and then have others pile on. So when we work together with Capgemini Micro Focus and engage with a customer, part of what we do is, again, do a high-level assessment of their environment, but also do a cost estimate as to what the running cost would be to move this workload into the cloud. Typically, and Stuart mentioned this, total cost savings and run costs are pretty tremendous. A lot of times we'll find 65-70% cost savings for a typical migration for hardware and software cost. And when you compare just the Azure cost compared to the mainframe hardware cost, it's about a 90% cost savings. So x86 platform extremely less expensive than the mainframe MIPS that you're paying for today. But that's all a process that when you engage with our group of companies that will work together to help you build the business case to justify not only the reduced costs, but also the cost of getting to this new environment.
Yeah, David, this is Vinny. Just to add, right? I mean, as Bob mentioned, based on your modernization technique and approach, right? It varies. Briefly, I covered in one of the slides. If you're doing a rehosting for the workload which which fits the purpose, right? You can go in the range of 60 to 70% easily. But just simply removing your technical depth right before your migration starts, that can reduce right 10 to 15% on the MIPS usage side. So there are lots of tools available, the ROI, the business case validators, which we provide, where based on the certain input you can derive the savings percentage.
And as we've described, the modernization
Excellent.
journey will continue. It's iterative. So it may well be that if, as a customer, you need to deliver fast savings, and meaning that total cost of ownership is actually the fundamental key driver to the business, then you're going to try and do less modernization as you move off the mainframe to Azure. And then you're going to use Azure to be your modernization platform going forward and further than that. If, however, it becomes actually more fundamental to the business that actually it's a change in business process is also required, then of course that's going to drive a different iteration, which it's likely to be the agility as to how fast you can deliver that changing business process rather than just the cost savings. Hence, you can see that the group of companies delivering that modernization maturity model are kind of flexible enough to adapt each project to the specific customer requirement, and that's fundamental. You know, every customer is unique. Every customer's journey is unique. We start from that basic premise in everything that we do.
Excellent. All right. Next question they addressed to Bob, so I'll start with you, Bob, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, please feel free. Ravi out there in the audience is asking, what's the most common pushback or reluctance that potential customers express before they start this journey? And then second piece is, are customers already Microsoft customers who embark on the modernization journey with Microsoft Azure? So that do they typically start off as Microsoft customers and then migrate into Azure, or are they on other platforms? Bob?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, for the first piece, when we think of you know, this modernization journey, well, actually, let me answer the second piece first. As far as working with customers, you know, some customers are, you know, of course, most every customer is a Microsoft customer. Some customers are already using Azure, and so moving to you know, using Azure for other workloads like mainframe workloads is a logical, you know, sequence. Other customers may be using AWS as the cloud that they started using to move virtual machines to the cloud. And we always like the opportunity to have a conversation about the benefits of Azure for those AWS customers. Some customers are AWS centric and you want to put everything on AWS. They've got a great practice as well and capabilities as well. We do have some advantages in that area. And so there's some real differences there between the two. And could you repeat that first question again?
Absolutely. They're asking what are the most common pushbacks or reluctance that potential customers express before they start.
Yeah, the two things that we hear the most is, number one, customers a lot of times have no idea that this is possible, let alone what are the right technologies and solutions to use. Other customers are interested on the technology level of making a transformation, but there's a cultural change. So the biggest pushback we see is that change in culture to embrace this transformation off the mainframe. If you're like a lot of customers that have had mainframes in your data center for decades, you know, taking this journey on or agreeing to look at moving stuff off the mainframe can be a little threatening to those people that are supporting those mainframe systems and workloads. So it's really helping change the culture to embrace this transformation as a continuation of the evolution of their data center.
Excellent. All right. Well, unless anyone else wants to add to that, I'll move on to the next question from Ernesto, which is around mainframe modernization. And that is, do you suggest that clients replatform or rebuild using cloud native tools? What's the best practice there?
Well, let me start and then definitely, definitely, Stuart, you pile on. And as Stuart was starting to say, there is no single solution. Every customer is different. If your applications are delivering business value, then replatforming, rehosting is a great technology method to use on an application by application basis. If you've got some applications that just aren't satisfying your business needs, those are good targets for considering rewriting them using cloud native services. And Stuart, I'm sure you have comments to add on as well.
No, I was just going to agree with you, Bob. I mean, there's all of the whole wealth of solutions are still available to customers. Meaning, the key value is that going through the assessment phase, you're identifying the applications that do have core value, and that you're identifying those that definitely need to be rewritten. You're probably identifying some that you're going to replace with another package, because that's also an alternative. And then it's linked into how fast do you need to deliver the move off the mainframe. So it's all iterative. Generally speaking, in a large financial services company, we would expect to deploy all of these different methods to at least some proportion of the application portfolio. And indeed, that's its flexibility. This is not a one size fits all and everything must fit into a particular bucket. It's actually far more adaptable, because we do understand that we're really trying to move our customers' entire business, at least the core applications that run typically what they perceive as the fundamental components of the business and the most secure, into a different platform. So I think all of us are going to agree with that. Part of it is managing the assessment work. Part of it is really understanding the business drivers in terms of when does benefit need to be delivered.
And I would also add that related to the Unix standpoint, most of those Unix-based systems are going to be multi-platform software, so you can actually run it across multiple systems. So moving it to a cloud-enabled infrastructure that runs Linux should not be an issue for the majority of the applications out there.
Very good. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here on our event. We've got still a lot of questions we'll have to get back to after today's presentation. But thank you so much, Bob, Vineet, David, and Stuart, for your excellent presentations today. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right, and before we go, I want to announce the winner of our $300 gift card that's going to Julie Gordon from Missouri. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you. Thank you to everyone for the excellent questions there in the Q&A. I learned so much on today's event about financial services, strategic modernization, migrating these types of workloads to the cloud, and just the best platform for the future. Thank you so much to Micro Focus, Microsoft, Intel, and Capgemini. I want to remind everyone, before you go, make sure you download the handout. It's a special trail map created there for you on this topic, key waypoints to financial services application modernization, in your handouts tab. And actually the full slide deck from today is available there as well in PDF. So make sure that you download that for additional information. Again, thanks so much to our expert presenters today. Thanks to the audience. I hope you learned a lot, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.